Most people think superpowers decline slowly, like a fading sunset over centuries, a gentle slide into irrelevance. But history tells a very different story. When empires fall, they fall suddenly, violently, and almost no one sees it coming until it's already too late. Rome, a city that had stood unconquered for 800 years, burned in 3 days. France, the strongest military in Europe, collapsed in 6 weeks. The Soviet Union, a superpower armed with 30,000 nuclear weapons, ceased to exist in less than 1,000 days. These weren't gradual declines, they were sudden collapses that shocked the world. And here's the part that should terrify you. The United States, the most powerful nation on earth, could be next. What does that mean for the world, for you? It means the patterns of history, the same patterns that brought empires to their knees, are playing out again. The question isn't if, it's when, and by the time you realize it, it may already be too late. Empires don't crumble slowly, like a worn-out building settling into the ground. They collapse fast, violently, and almost without warning. The secret behind their fragile facade isn't wealth, land, or armies. It's confidence. Confidence that the currency will hold value, confidence that the military will protect you, confidence that the government can maintain order, confidence that tomorrow will be like today. And confidence is delicate. It can shatter in an instant. Imagine a dam holding back a vast river. For years, tiny cracks form. Engineers see them, but the water still holds. People living below the dam see it every day, believing it will always stand. Then one day, the cracks widen, the pressure becomes too great, and the dam bursts. Not gradually, not gently, all at once, and everyone downstream has mere minutes to escape. That's what imperial collapse looks like. The empire is the dam, and the pressures, debt, military overreach, currency debasement, social decay, have been building quietly, invisibly, until the moment it all gives way. Rome seemed eternal, a city untouchable, protected by gods and the weight of centuries. By the late 300s, everyone knew the empire was in decline. Barbarian tribes raided the borders, the military was stretched thin, the currency was losing value, but Rome itself, untouchable, invincible. In 408 AD, Alaric, king of the Visigoths, surrounded the city and demanded gold, silver, and supplies. Rome paid, and for a moment, crisis averted. A year later, Alaric returned with more demands. Rome paid again, but the treasury was emptying, and the city's defenses were paper thin. Then came August 24th, 410 AD. The gates opened, not through battle, but through betrayal. Slaves inside allowed the Visigoths in. For 3 days, Rome burned. Temples stripped of gold, aristocrats ransomed or killed, citizens fled with whatever they could carry. The legions were scattered across the empire, unable to defend the city. For the Romans living through it, the collapse wasn't abstract. Currency became worthless, property meant nothing, social status offered no protection. The system that promised order had vanished. Rome didn't just fall, it imploded, and the shock echoed across an empire that had believed itself eternal. France, in 1940, believed itself untouchable. The Maginot Line stretched across the eastern border, the strongest military in Europe stood ready, and the memory of World War I victories bolstered national pride. The people were confident, the government was confident, and yet, on May 10th, German forces invaded, not through the heavily fortified Maginot Line, but through Belgium and the Ardennes, a route French commanders had deemed impassable. Within days, French defenses crumbled. Tanks rolled through forests and fields that were supposed to be safe. The British Expeditionary Force was trapped at Dunkirk, forced to evacuate under fire. By June 10th, the French government fled Paris.
By June 14th, German troops marched into the city without resistance. 6 weeks, from confident superpower to occupied territory. Ordinary citizens watched their world unravel. Refugees clogged the roads. Families fled south with nothing but what they could carry. Their savings worthless, their homes no longer safe. Soldiers abandoned posts, officers fled, and the government they trusted had vanished. France didn't just lose a war, it disintegrated before its own people's eyes, and the shock was absolute. By 1989, the Soviet Union still seemed invincible. Nuclear weapons, a massive military, permanent superpower status. It had dominated global politics for decades. Yet cracks were everywhere. Eastern Europe was restless, economies were failing, people whispered of change, but nobody expected the empire itself to vanish. Then the Berlin Wall fell on November 9, 1989, and with it, the illusion of stability. Eastern European countries claimed independence. The Soviet government did nothing. They couldn't. Over the next year, Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Romania all slipped away. The core, the Union of Republics, seemed safe, but it wasn't. In August 1991, hardline communists attempted a coup to restore control. The military refused to fire on civilians. Boris Yeltsin emerged as the de facto leader, while Gorbachev faded into irrelevance. One by one, the republics declared independence: Ukraine, Belarus, Kazakhstan, and more. By December 26, 1991, the Soviet Union ceased to exist. For ordinary Soviet citizens, life changed overnight. The ruble became worthless, pensions and savings evaporated, factories closed, crime surged, regions descended into chaos. A superpower in less than 900 days had vanished, not through invasion, but collapse from within. Every empire that has fallen follows a pattern, a sequence of collapse that repeats across time. 6 phases mark the end: denial, credibility break, cascade, fragmentation, freefall, and reset. The first phase, denial, is where the cracks are ignored. In Rome, leaders reassured citizens for decades, insisting that raids and economic troubles were manageable. In France, the years between World War I and 1940 were filled with confident declarations that the nation remained a superpower. In the Soviet Union, from the 1970s to the late 1980s, everyone believed communism would prevail, that the system could endure. But denial only delays the inevitable. Then comes the credibility break, the moment when reality slams into perception. A battle lost that shouldn't have been lost, an economic collapse that exposes the currency as worthless, a political failure that shatters trust in the government. For Rome, it was the destruction of the legions at Adrianople. For France, the fall of Paris. For the USSR, the decade-long loss in Afghanistan. The empire's reputation dies, and with it, the faith of its citizens. The acceleration that follows is terrifying. Once confidence is gone, collapse speeds up, spreading like wildfire across everything an empire touches. Phase 3, the cascade, is when everything starts to fail at once. Allies abandon the empire, enemies test its boundaries, and the currency loses value almost overnight. Social cohesion breaks, riots erupt, and the systems people relied on can no longer protect them. The collapse accelerates, moving faster than anyone can respond. Then comes fragmentation. The empire literally falls apart. Provinces, regions, or republics assert independence. Rome shrank to just Italy as its provinces became kingdoms. France watched its colonies seek independence while the government struggled to maintain control. The Soviet Union's republics declared autonomy one after another until the Union no longer existed. Fragmentation is inevitable because the structures holding an empire together, military, bureaucracy, finances, can no longer function. The people who lived within the empire wake up to a world they no longer recognize, and the ground beneath them disappears.
Phase 5, Freefall, is the darkest. The economy collapses, money becomes worthless, supply chains break, and basic necessities grow scarce. Crime explodes as governments lose control, and ordinary people are forced to fend for themselves. Starvation, violence, and chaos become daily realities.
It's a time when survival is the only focus. Then comes the reset. The old empire is gone, and a new order emerges. Sometimes it's foreign occupation, sometimes smaller states rise, sometimes a new government takes power. But the world is forever changed. The people who survive must adapt to a reality that is completely different from the one they knew. For Rome, medieval kingdoms replaced the empire. For France, liberation and a diminished status followed. For the Soviet Union, Russia and 14 independent republics rose from the ashes. The reset is not a return to what was, it is a new world entirely, born from the wreckage of the old. The denial phase for the United States has ended. The 2008 financial crisis, endless wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, massive COVID-era spending, and political dysfunction all exposed cracks that were impossible to ignore. Confidence in the system is faltering. Credibility breaks are beginning. The chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan showed the limits of military power. The most advanced military on Earth struggled to protect allies and evacuate citizens in just 11 days. The dollar is losing its status as the global reserve currency. China and Russia are trading in yuan and rubles instead of dollars. Trust in American institutions is at historic lows. Congress approval ratings plummet, the Supreme Court is seen as partisan, and the media is widely distrusted. The patterns of historical collapses echo here. Once confidence falters, the cascade can begin. History is showing the warning signs, and the United States is at a crossroads that could redefine its future forever. The collapse of an empire doesn't wait for a convenient moment. It begins with a trigger, and for the United States, there are several possible sparks. One could be a military failure. Imagine a conflict over Taiwan. The U.S. has committed to defending the island, but supply lines are too long, hypersonic missiles make carriers vulnerable, and wargame simulations show the difficulty of a quick, decisive response. A defeat here would shatter global trust in American military power. Another trigger could be a debt and currency crisis. The U.S. owes $36 trillion, paying $1 trillion each year in interest. Bond markets could demand higher rates, forcing the government to choose between default, hyperinflation, or extreme austerity. Each option would devastate the economy. A third trigger could be a political crisis, a contested election where states refuse to certify results, protests spiral into riots, and the federal government struggles to maintain authority. Once any of these events occur, the cascade begins. Confidence collapses, social order erodes, currency plunges, and the historical pattern repeats itself, faster and more violently than anyone expects. If the cascade begins, life on the ground will change faster than anyone can imagine. The dollar could lose value rapidly, inflation soaring from single digits to triple digits, making everyday goods unaffordable. Gas, groceries, medicine, electronics, everything would skyrocket in price, and supply chains would crumble. Social order would collapse, police and public services would falter as budgets vanish, crime would explode, and citizens would be forced to protect themselves. Protests and riots would become routine. Trust in government would disappear. States might start ignoring federal authority, making trade deals and decisions independently, while military bases closed due to lack of funds. The economy would spiral, unemployment would skyrocket, businesses fail, pensions and savings vanish, and the stock market collapses. Ordinary Americans would face a world where survival becomes the priority. Food, water, and safety replace politics and comfort. The systems they relied on would no longer exist, and the fight to survive would define every day. The collapse of empires is not a matter of opinion, it's math, history, and patterns repeating themselves. Rome fell in days, France in weeks, the Soviet Union in less than 3 years. The United States is entering the cascade faster than any of them. The signs are everywhere, from military setbacks to economic instability,
from declining trust in institutions to a currency losing its global standing. The question is not if, but when. Will you recognize it, or will you be blindsided like the Romans in 409 AD, the French in 1940, the Soviets in 1988? This is not about politics, left or right, Republican or Democrat. It's about reality, about understanding the forces that no empire can escape. Stay informed, pay attention, and watch history unfold before your eyes. The cascade has begun, and the choices you make now determine whether you will see it coming or be swept away with the collapse. The signs are everywhere, and the moment is already here.